The morning started like any other day for Park Ji-won. He walked through the glass corridors of the Galactic Academic Consortium, his footsteps echoing softly against the crystal walls. Outside the massive windows, 3 purple moons hung in the pale green sky of Kepler 442b. Students from dozens of different worlds moved past him, their alien forms as familiar to him now as his own reflection. Ji-won had been studying xenobiology here for 2 years. At 24, he was one of only 30 humans in the entire consortium. Back on Earth, his parents had been so proud when he received the acceptance letter. His mother had cried happy tears while his father had immediately started bragging to all the neighbors in their Seoul apartment complex. Now, as Ji-won settled into his usual seat in advanced interspecies relations, he felt homesick. The class was taught by Professor Veltar, a tall being with silver skin and 4 arms who came from the Vega system. Ji-won liked the professor. Veltar always treated human students fairly, unlike some of the other faculty members who seemed to think humans were too primitive for advanced education. The classroom filled up quickly. Kang Min-soo, Ji-won's closest friend at the consortium, slid into the seat beside him. Min-soo looked almost human except for his golden eyes and the fact that he was nearly 3 meters tall. His people, the Altarians, were known throughout the galaxy for their peaceful nature and love of learning. "Did you finish the report on trade relations?" Min-soo asked in his deep voice. Ji-won nodded and pulled out his datapad. "Barely. I was up until 3 in the morning working on it." Lee So-hee, a brilliant researcher from the Vega system, turned around from her seat in front of them. Her blue-tinted skin shimmered slightly in the classroom lights. "You humans always wait until the last minute to do everything," she said with what passed for a smile among her species. "Not all of us," Ji-won replied. "Just me." Professor Veltar entered the classroom and all conversation stopped. The professor moved to the front with unusual urgency. His 4 arms gestured quickly as he activated the holographic display system. "Students, I have important news to share with you today," Veltar began. His voice carried a weight that made everyone sit up straighter. "The Galactic Council has made a significant decision regarding planetary classifications." The holographic display showed a familiar blue and green sphere floating in space. Ji-won's heart jumped. It was Earth. "As of this morning, the planet known as Earth has been reclassified," Professor Veltar continued. "Previously listed as a Class C developing world, Earth is now designated as a Class Z active war zone." The words hit Ji-won like a physical blow. Around him, his classmates turned to stare. Some looked frightened, others curious, but most looked at him with something that might have been pity. "What does that mean exactly?" asked a student from the back of the room. Professor Veltar's expression was grim. "Class Z designation is reserved for planets experiencing constant warfare, environmental collapse, and social breakdown. All contact with Class Z worlds is strictly forbidden. No trade, no communication, and no travel." Ji-won felt the blood drain from his face. No contact meant he could never go home. He would never see his parents again, never walk through the streets of Seoul, never taste his grandmother's kimchi. "Professor," Ji-won said, raising his hand. His voice sounded strange in his own ears. "What evidence led to this decision?" The professor hesitated. Ji-won could see the sympathy in his alien features. "The Galactic Intelligence Service has been monitoring Earth's communications for the past 6 months. The evidence shows constant military conflicts across all continents, widespread use of chemical weapons, mass casualty events occurring daily, and systematic destruction of the planetary environment." Min-soo leaned closer to Ji-won. "I'm sorry, friend," he whispered. So he turned around again, her expression sad. "Is it really that bad on your world?" Ji-won opened his mouth to answer, then closed it again. How could he explain? The military conflicts were probably news reports about local disputes or police responses. The chemical weapons might be farmers spraying pesticides on their crops. The mass casualty events could be anything from hospitals treating flu, patients to traffic accident reports. But how could he make them understand that what sounded terrifying to alien ears was just normal life for humans? The current human students at the consortium will be allowed to complete their education, Professor Veltar continued. However, no new human students will be admitted, and all current students will be subject to additional monitoring and restrictions. The word monitoring sent a chill down Jiwon's spine. He thought about his weekly video calls with his parents, his emails to friends back home, his research projects that often referenced Earth's biological systems. Would all of that be watched now? Are there any questions? The professor asked. Student from the Draconian Empire raised one of her scaled arms. Professor, should we be concerned about the human students here? If their world is so dangerous, might they be dangerous too? Jiwon felt every eye in the room turn to him. He wanted to stand up and shout that he had never hurt anyone in his life, that humans were not monsters, that Earth was not the hellscape they imagined. Instead, he sat quietly and tried to control his breathing. That is not an appropriate question, Professor Veltar said firmly. Human students at this institution have shown nothing but dedication to their studies and peaceful cooperation with all species. But the damage was done. Jiwon could see it in the way his classmates looked at him now. The curiosity and friendship had been replaced by wariness and fear. After class ended, Jiwon walked slowly back to his dormitory room. His mind raced with the implications of what had happened. Other human students would be facing the same reactions, the same sudden isolation, the same crushing realization that they might never see their families again. As he sat on his narrow bed, staring out at the alien landscape beyond his window, Jiwon made a decision. He would not accept this quietly. Somewhere in the galaxy's vast bureaucracy, someone had made a terrible mistake about Earth. The intelligence reports had been misunderstood, the evidence misinterpreted. Earth was not a war zone. It was home. It was a world where humans had learned to solve problems, adapt to challenges, and work together despite their differences. The same qualities that made the galaxy fear them were the qualities that made them valuable. Jiwon pulled out his data pad and began typing a message to Kim Da-yoon, another human student studying linguistics on a nearby station. If the Galactic Council wanted evidence about Earth, he would give them evidence. But it would be the truth, not the distorted interpretation they had been fed. The fight for Earth's reputation was just beginning. 3 days had passed since the announcement, and Jiwon could barely concentrate on his studies. Every time he walked through the corridors, conversations stopped. Students whispered when they thought he could not hear them. Words like dangerous and savage followed him wherever he went. He found Kim Da-yoon in the linguistics lab, hunched over a translation device. She looked up when he entered, and he could see the same exhaustion in her eyes that he felt in his bones. "Have you been sleeping?" she asked. "Not much," Jiwon admitted, pulling up a chair beside her. "You?" Da-yoon shook her head. "Every time I close my eyes, I think about my little brother back in Busan. He just started high school. He was so excited about my studies here, and now..." She trailed off. "Now we might never see our families again," Jiwon finished. They sat in silence for a moment. Around them, the lab hummed with the quiet sounds of translation computers and data processors. Finally, Jiwon leaned forward. "I've been thinking," he said. "What if the Galactic Intelligence Service got it wrong? What if they misunderstood the communications they intercepted?" Da-yoon looked at him with interest. "What do you mean?" "Think about it. They said there were reports of constant military conflicts. But what if those were just news broadcasts or police reports? Things that sound scary to aliens but are completely normal to us?" Da-yoon's eyes widened. The chemical weapons could be farming reports, pesticides and fertilizers. Exactly. And mass casualty events could be anything. Hospital admissions during flu season, traffic accident statistics, even reports about sports injuries. For the first time in days, Da-yoon smiled. "We need to see those reports." "How?" "The intelligence service files are classified." "Leave that to me," Da-yoon said, turning back to her computer. I've been working on some advanced translation protocols for my thesis. If I can modify them slightly. Over the next week, the two humans worked in secret. Da-Hyun used her linguistics expertise to access communication databases, while Ji-won analyzed the biological and environmental data. What they found was both heartbreaking and infuriating. "Look at this," Da-Hyun said, pointing to her screen. They intercepted a communication about coordinated aerial strikes hitting multiple targets across the eastern seaboard. The computer translated that as evidence of warfare. Ji-won read the original message carefully. "That's a weather report about Hurricane Miranda. The aerial strikes are rescue helicopters delivering supplies to storm victims. And here," Da-Hyun continued, "they recorded deployment of toxic agents across agricultural zones. That's farmers spraying for crop pests before harvest season. The more they discovered, the clearer the picture became. Everything the Galactic Intelligence Service saw as evidence of a war-torn planet was actually evidence of humans trying to solve problems and help each other. But their research did not go unnoticed. Agent No Tai-hyun appeared at their lab one evening, just as they were, preparing to leave. The Centaurian was tall and thin with pale blue skin and large dark eyes. Unlike most of his species, he had always been friendly to human students. "Mr. Park, Ms. Kim," he said quietly. "We need to talk." They followed him to a small conference room deep in the administrative section. Tae-hyun activated a privacy screen and sat across from them. "I know what you've been doing," he said, "and I want you to stop." "We're just researching," Ji-won began. "You're questioning an official Galactic Council decision," Tae-hyun interrupted. "That's considered seditious behavior. There are people watching you now, people who would be happy to see all human students removed from the consortium." Da-Hyun leaned forward. "But we're proving that the decision was wrong. Doesn't that matter?" Tae-hyun's expression was sad. "Not to everyone. There's a group within the council called the Hegemony Alliance. They've been pushing for stricter controls on newer species for years. The Earth classification gave them exactly what they wanted." "So they don't care if it's wrong?" Ji-won asked. "Some of them prefer it to be wrong," Tae-hyun admitted. "Humans have been causing disruption since you joined the galactic community. Your solutions to problems often ignore established protocols. Your adaptability makes other species uncomfortable." Ji-won felt a flash of anger. "So we're being punished for being good at solving problems?" "You're being contained because you're too good at it," Tae-hyun said bluntly. "In 50 years, humans have revolutionized agriculture on 12 worlds, created new medical treatments that work across species barriers, and prevented 3 different conflicts through unconventional diplomacy. The older civilizations see that as threatening to their authority. The weight of this revelation settled over them. It was not just about Earth being misunderstood. It was about humanity being deliberately misrepresented to justify keeping them isolated. "What should we do?" Da-Hyun asked. "Officially, stop your research, keep your heads down, and finish your studies quietly." Tae-hyun stood to leave. "Unofficially, be very careful who you trust, but know that you're not alone. There are others who believe the classification was wrong." After Tae-hyun left, Ji-won and Da-Hyun sat in the empty conference room, processing what they had learned. "We can't stop now," Da-Hyun said finally. "If anything, we need to work harder." "But how?" "If we're being watched, then we get smarter about it and we find those other people Tae-hyun mentioned." Over the following days, they reached out carefully to other human students across the galaxy. The responses they received were troubling. Park Seung-yun, studying engineering on Proxima Centauri, reported being questioned by security forces about his weapons research, which was actually a project to improve water purification systems. Choi Minji, a medical student on Kepler 438b, had been suspended pending an investigation into her biological warfare experiments, her work on developing vaccines for cross-species diseases. The pattern was clear. Across the galaxy, human students were being targeted, their work misinterpreted, and their presence increasingly unwelcome. But they also found allies. Professor Yan Jiho from the philosophy department quietly offered his support. Dr. An Soo-jin from the medical school provided access to her research databases. Most surprisingly, Several alien students and faculty members reached out, expressing doubt about the Earth classification. As Jiwon lay in his dormitory bed that night, staring at the ceiling, he realized that their small research project had become something much larger. They were no longer just trying to prove that Earth was not a war zone. They were fighting for humanity's place in the galactic community. Tomorrow, he would begin reaching out to the underground network that was forming. The evidence they had gathered was just the beginning. If the Hegemony Alliance wanted to paint humans as dangerous, they would learn just how determined humans could be when fighting for something they believed in. The real battle was just starting. The meeting took place in an abandoned storage bay deep in the lower levels of the consortium station. Jiwon followed the directions Da-hyun had given him, moving through service corridors he had never seen before. The air was thick and humid, and strange mechanical sounds echoed from the walls. When he found the right door, he knocked 3 times, paused, then knocked twice more. The signal Da-hyun had taught him. The door opened to reveal Choi Woo-bin, a human student from the physics department. Jiwon had seen him around campus but had never spoken to him directly. Woo-bin was older than most students, maybe 30, with serious eyes and calloused hands that suggested he had worked with tools before coming to study among the stars. "Come in quickly," Woo-bin said, checking the corridor behind Jiwon before sealing the door. Inside the storage bay, Jiwon was surprised to find nearly 20 people gathered in a circle. About half were humans, but the others came from various worlds. He recognized a few faces from his classes, but many were strangers. "Welcome to our little rebellion," said Song Yuna, a human woman with short black hair and a confident smile. She was studying tactical analysis and had a reputation for being brilliant at solving complex problems, though we prefer to call it a fact-finding committee. Jiwon took a seat on one of the supply crates they were using as chairs. Da-hyun was already there, along with several other human students he had been corresponding with over the past weeks. "Let's start with introductions. For our new members," Woo-bin said. "I'm Choi Woo-bin, studying applied physics. I was born on Mars Colony, but my family moved to Earth when I was 12. According to galactic intelligence, I grew up in a war zone. According to me, I grew up in the most peaceful neighborhood in New Seoul." One by one, the humans shared their stories. Each had similar experiences, their research being questioned, their motives suspected, their home planet mischaracterized as a hellscape of violence and destruction. Then the alien spoke. There was Kethvar, a young Altarian who had studied Earth history and found it fascinating rather than frightening. Zilnara, a vegan scientist who had worked with human researchers and found their methods innovative rather than dangerous. Even Thoxamun, a member of the usually hostile draconian species, who believed the classification system was being used to suppress promising civilizations. "The evidence is clear," Yuna said, when the introductions were finished. The Earth classification was not based on accurate intelligence. It was based on deliberately misinterpreted data, pushed through by species who feel threatened by human advancement. "But we need more than evidence," Woo-bin added. "We need proof that can't be ignored or dismissed." An older human named Hyun-woo raised his hand. He was a graduate student in interstellar relations, and Jiwon had always admired his work. "I've been researching the Hegemony Alliance," he said. "They're more powerful than we realized. 3 of the 5 permanent council members belong to it. They control the intelligence service, and they have significant influence over academic institutions like this one." "How significant?" Da-hyun asked. Hyun-woo's expression was grim. "Significant enough that my advisor told me yesterday to distance myself from problematic human students if I want to complete my degree." The room fell silent. Everyone understood what that meant. The pressure was increasing, and soon even sympathetic faculty members would be forced to choose between their careers and their principles. "There's something else," said Bae Suman, a quiet woman who worked in station maintenance. "I've been monitoring communications between the council chambers and Hegemony Alliance headquarters. They're planning something bigger than just the Earth classification." She activated a small holographic display, showing what looked like a legislative document. "They're proposing a new category, Class X, quarantine worlds. Any planet classified as Class X would be completely isolated from galactic society. No contact, no trade, no communication, forever. And Earth would be the first world to receive this classification, Jiwan said, reading the document. Not just Earth, Suman continued. They have a list of 12 other worlds they consider problematic. All of them are newer members of the galactic community. All of them have species that solve problems differently than the established civilizations. Yuna stood up, pacing in the small space. They're not just trying to isolate humans. They're trying to eliminate competition from any species that threatens their way of doing things. So what do we do? Asked a young Altarian student named Velshi. The evidence we have isn't enough to change their minds. They'll just claim we misunderstood the data, the same way they claim to have misunderstood the Earth communications. Wubin smiled grimly. Then we don't give them data to misinterpret. We give them something they can't deny. What do you mean? Jiwan asked. We show them what humans really are, not through reports or communications, but through actions. We prove that everything they fear about us is actually what makes us valuable. Over the next hour, they developed their plan. It was risky and would require perfect timing, but it was the only way to demonstrate the truth about humanity in a way that could not be misrepresented. They would wait for a crisis. And on a station filled with experimental technology, alien species with different emergency protocols, and the constant dangers of space travel, a crisis was inevitable. When it came, they would not follow established procedures or wait for official authorization. They would do what humans did best: adapt, improvise, and solve the problem using whatever tools they had available. There's one more thing, Hyunwoo said as the meeting was ending. My advisor isn't the only faculty member being pressured. Professor Veltar was told to report any suspicious behavior from human students. Others are being asked to modify their teaching materials to present Earth and humanity in a more negative light. The implications were sobering. Even their allies were being turned against them. Then we move faster, Wubin decided, and we're more careful about who we trust. As the group dispersed, leaving the storage bay in small groups to avoid attention, Jiwan felt a mixture of hope and fear. They were no longer just students trying to correct a misunderstanding. They were rebels fighting against a conspiracy that reached the highest levels of galactic government, but they were also humans. And if there was one thing the galaxy was about to learn about humans, it was that they never gave up when fighting for something important. Walking back through the service corridors, Jiwan thought about his parents in Seoul, probably wondering why his video calls had become so infrequent and monitored. They had no idea that their son was part of a movement that could determine humanity's future among the stars. He would not let them down. He would not let his species be isolated and forgotten. Whatever it took, he would prove that Earth was not a war zone. It was home to the most resilient and innovative species the galaxy had ever seen. The real test was coming soon. The alarm began at Oro 347 station time, a piercing wail that cut through the artificial night cycle. Jiwan jerked awake in his dormitory bed, immediately alert. This was not a drill. The sound was too urgent, too panicked. Red emergency lights bathed the corridors as students and faculty emerged from their quarters. The public address system crackled to life with Professor Veltar's voice, but it was strained and frightened. All students report to designated emergency stations immediately. This is not a drill. Repeat, this is not a drill. Jiwan grabbed his emergency kit and ran toward the main gathering area. Around him, alien students moved with varying levels of panic. The Altarians were calm but confused, their tall forms moving steadily through the corridors. The Vegans were calculating frantically on handheld devices, trying to understand what was happening through mathematics. The Draconians were arguing loudly about proper emergency protocols. But it was the faculty that worried Jiwan most. They looked genuinely terrified. He found Dahyun and Wubin at Emergency Station 7 along with about 50 other students. Through the massive viewing windows, space looked different. The stars were too bright and there was a strange shimmer in the void that hurt to look at directly. Solar storm. Wubin said grimly when he saw Jiwon approaching. A big one. Class 9 magnitude, maybe higher. Dahyun pulled up data on her portable scanner. The electromagnetic radiation is off the charts. It hit the station's shields about 10 minutes ago. Professor Veltar's voice filled the area again, but now it was barely controlled panic. All students remain calm. We are experiencing technical difficulties with our evacuation systems. Repeat, remain calm. Technical difficulties. Jiwon looked around at the alien students and faculty. The Altarians were standing in perfect formation, waiting for instructions that were not coming. The Vegans were still calculating, but their equations were not providing solutions. The Draconians were demanding to speak to higher authorities. No one was actually doing anything. The evacuation pods, Yuna said, appearing beside them with Suman close behind. They're not working. What do you mean not working? Dahyun asked. Suman pulled up a schematic on her maintenance tablet. The electromagnetic interference from the storm is disrupting the pod launch systems. The computer can't calculate safe trajectories, so it won't release any pods. How long until the storm passes? Jiwon asked. 14 hours, Wubin said, checking his readings. Maybe 16. But the station's shields won't last that long under this kind of bombardment. Around them, the alien emergency protocols were failing completely. The faculty were consulting their procedure manuals, but the manuals had no solutions for this situation. The station administrators were trying to contact the Galactic Emergency Response Force, but communications were being disrupted by the storm. Jiwon looked at his fellow humans. They all had the same expression he was sure he wore, the look of people who saw a problem that needed solving. The pods don't need computer guidance, Yuna said quietly. They have manual override systems. Manual overrides that no one here knows how to use, Suman added, except maintenance staff. And me. The electromagnetic interference is the real problem, Wubin said. We need to create a safe corridor through the radiation field, something the computer can't calculate because it's never been tried before. Dahyun was already pulling up station schematics. The cargo bay has industrial equipment we could use, magnetic field generators, emergency power cells, maybe even some of the mining charges left over from the station's construction. They looked at each other in silence for a moment. What they were thinking was completely against regulations. It would involve accessing restricted areas, using dangerous equipment without authorization, and attempting an evacuation method that existed nowhere in the official emergency procedures. It was also the only way to save everyone on the station. Professor Veltar, Jiwon called out. The Altarian faculty member turned toward him, his forearms gesturing helplessly. Mr. Park, please return to your designated position. We are waiting for official guidance from the Emergency Response Force. Professor, the communication systems are down. No one is coming to help us, but we think we know how to fix the evacuation pods. Veltar's expression was pained. Mr. Park, I appreciate your concern, but emergency procedures must be followed. Only qualified personnel can— There are no qualified personnel here, Wubin interrupted, stepping forward. No one on this station has ever dealt with a solar storm this powerful. The procedures don't cover this situation. Then we wait, said Professor Zilneth, the Vegan department head. The storm will eventually pass. The shields won't last, Yuna said bluntly. You can see the power fluctuations. We have maybe 6 hours before containment fails. When that happens, everyone on this station dies. The silence that followed was broken only by the continuing alarm. Jiwon could see the conflict in Professor Veltar's alien features. Following procedure versus saving lives. Authority versus survival. What exactly are you proposing? Veltar asked finally. The humans spent the next hour explaining their plan. They would use the magnetic field generators to create a safe corridor through the electromagnetic storm, manually override the pod launch systems, and evacuate the station in groups. It would require splitting up, working in dangerous conditions, and improvising solutions as they went. The alien faculty listened with growing horror. Everything the humans suggested violated safety protocols, ignored proper authorization procedures, and involved risks that no computer model could properly calculate. This is madness, Professor Zilneth declared. We cannot authorize such dangerous improvisation. Then don't authorize it, Ji-won said. Just don't stop us. What followed was the most intense 6 hours of Ji-won's life. While the alien students and faculty remained in the emergency stations, the humans spread throughout the station. Woo-bin and a team of volunteers headed to the cargo bay to jury-rig the magnetic field generators. Yuna took control of the evacuation pod systems, manually overriding safety protocols that had never been designed for this situation. Sumin led teams through maintenance tunnels to reroute power and create backup systems from spare parts. Da-hyun coordinated communications between the teams, using improvised relay systems to work around the electromagnetic interference. And Ji-won found himself everywhere at once, solving problems as they arose, adapting plans when circumstances changed, and doing what humans had always done, refusing to accept that any problem was impossible to solve. When the first evacuation pod launched, successfully, manually guided through the electromagnetic storm using their improvised systems, a cheer went up from the remaining students and faculty. When the 10th pod launched, Professor Veltar began helping coordinate the evacuation. When the 20th pod launched, even Professor Zilnath admitted that the human approach was working. The entire evacuation took 4 hours. By the time the last pod cleared the station's launch bay, the shields were failing completely, and the station's hull was beginning to buckle under the electromagnetic bombardment. Ji-won was in the final pod, along with Da-hyun, Woo-bin, Yuna, and Professor Veltar. As they watched the station's lights flicker and die behind them, Veltar turned to the humans. "How did you know that would work?" he asked. "We didn't," Woo-bin admitted. "But we knew that doing nothing definitely wouldn't work." "Your approach violated every safety protocol in the emergency manual," Veltar continued. "The emergency manual never imagined this situation," Yuna replied. "So we had to imagine new solutions." The rescue and recovery took 3 days. The entire evacuation was broadcast across the galactic news networks, showing human students risking their lives to save alien classmates who had just been told to fear them. The footage of humans working together, improvising solutions and refusing to give up even in the face of impossible odds, spread throughout the galaxy. But Ji-won knew that the real impact was not on the news networks. It was in the expressions of his alien classmates, who had seen humans not as dangerous warriors from a war-torn world, but as people who would sacrifice everything to help others. The demonstration they had planned had happened, but not the way they had expected. They had not shown the galaxy that humans were harmless. They had shown that humans were exactly as dangerous as the Hegemony Alliance claimed. Dangerous to the status quo, dangerous to established procedures, dangerous to the idea that some problems could not be solved. As their rescue ship headed toward the nearest inhabited world, Ji-won looked out at the stars and wondered what would happen next. The galaxy had seen what humans could do when faced with the impossible. Now they would have to decide whether that made humans valuable allies or threats to be contained. The real test was just beginning. The Galactic Tribunal Chamber was the most impressive building Ji-won had ever seen. Built from crystallized starlight and floating in the void between 3 gas giants, it represented the pinnacle of galactic civilization. Massive viewing screens showed delegates from hundreds of worlds all gathered to decide a single question: what should be done about the humans? Ji-won sat in the defendants section with Da-hyun, Woo-bin, Yuna, and 12 other human students from across the galaxy. They wore simple gray uniforms provided by the tribunal, and their movements were monitored by floating security drones. Behind them sat their families, who had been allowed to attend despite Earth's Class Z designation. Ji-won could see his parents in the gallery, his mother clutching his father's hand as they tried to understand the alien legal proceedings. They had aged since he last saw them through the restricted video calls. The stress of having their son branded as dangerous had taken its toll. The chief arbiter, an ancient being from the Andromeda Collective, called the session to order. Her voice filled the chamber through speakers that translated her words into hundreds of languages simultaneously. "We gather today to address the matter of human students at galactic institutions their recent actions during the Kepler 442b station emergency, and their challenge to the planetary classification of Earth. The prosecution will present the case for containment. The defense will argue for integration. The tribunal will decide. The prosecution was led by Yoon Seojun, a human who had immigrated to Vega Prime 30 years ago and fully integrated into alien society. He had changed his appearance through surgical modifications, spoke only in galactic standard, and had publicly renounced his Earth citizenship. To the aliens, he represented what humans could become if properly civilized. To the human defendants, he was a traitor. Honored arbiters, Seojun began, his modified vocal cords giving his words an alien resonance. The recent events at Kepler 442b prove exactly why the Earth classification is correct and necessary. When faced with a crisis, human students immediately abandoned established procedures, ignored proper authority, and implemented dangerous unauthorized solutions. He activated a holographic display showing footage from the station evacuation. They used explosives in pressurized environments. They overrode safety systems designed to protect lives. They exposed other students to electromagnetic radiation, levels that could have caused permanent damage. Murmurs rippled through the chamber. The alien delegates nodded as Seojun presented the technical violations, the protocol breaches, the risks that had been taken. This is the human pattern, Seojun continued. When faced with problems, they do not consult experts, follow established procedures, or wait for proper authorization. They improvise, they ignore safety margins, they take risks that endanger themselves and others. This behavior is exactly what we see in the intercepted communications from Earth. Constant crisis response, dangerous improvisation, reckless disregard for established systems. Jiwon felt sick listening to the prosecution's case. Everything Seojun said was technically true, but he was describing humanity's greatest strengths as if they were fatal flaws. The solution is clear, Seojun concluded. Humans must be contained, supervised and gradually educated to follow proper galactic procedures. Earth's Class Z designation should be upgraded to Class X, with complete isolation until human civilization can be properly reformed. The defense was led by Oh Jin-hee, a half-human attorney whose Altarian mother had given her citizenship rights throughout the galaxy. She was young, brilliant, and one of the few legal experts who truly understood both human and alien perspectives. Honored arbiters, Jin-hee began. The prosecution asks you to punish humans for being too good at solving problems. Every action they describe, the improvisation, the risk-taking, the refusal to give up when established procedures fail, these are not flaws to be corrected. They are exactly the qualities the galaxy needs. She replaced Seojun's technical displays with different footage from the same evacuation. Instead of focusing on protocol violations, she showed human students working together, alien classmates helping with the rescue efforts, and Professor Veltar later describing the evacuation as miraculous. In the past 50 years, human innovations have prevented famines on 7 worlds, stopped 3 interspecies conflicts through unconventional diplomacy, and created medical breakthroughs that have saved millions of lives across dozens of species. Are we to believe that this track record of helping others makes them dangerous? She walked closer to the judge's platform. The prosecution claims that humans ignore proper procedures. But what happens when proper procedures are not enough? What happens when established systems fail? Do we follow protocols into extinction, or do we adapt and survive? The chamber was quiet now, the alien delegates listening carefully. Earth is not a war zone, Jin-hee continued. It is a training ground. It is a world that has taught its people that any problem can be solved if you are willing to work hard enough, think creatively enough, and refuse to give up when others say it is impossible. When the evidence phase ended, Jiwon was called to testify on behalf of all human defendants. He walked to the witness platform on shaking legs, looking up at judges from species he had never seen before. Mr. Park, the chief arbiter said, you are charged with endangering lives, violating safety protocols, and challenging established galactic authority. How do you respond? Jiwon took a deep breath. Everything he said here would be broadcast across the galaxy. His words would determine not just his own future, but the future of every human in space. Honored arbiters, he began. I am guilty of everything the prosecution claims. I did violate safety protocols. I did ignore proper procedures. I did take risks that could have endangered lives. Shocked murmurs filled the chamber. Behind him, he could hear his mother gasp. But I am not guilty of being dangerous to galactic civilization. I am guilty of being human. He turned to address the entire assembly. When I was growing up on Earth, my grandmother told me stories about my great-grandfather. During the Korean War, his village was cut off by floods. The evacuation, procedures called for waiting for military rescue, but my great-grandfather looked at the rising water, looked at the children who would drown if they waited for proper authorization, and led the entire village to safety using fishing boats and improvised bridges. Jiwon's voice grew stronger. That is what humans do. We do not wait for permission to save lives. We do not follow procedures when those procedures will get people killed. We do not accept that any problem is impossible to solve. He pointed to the viewing screens showing Earth. You call our world a war zone because you intercepted communications about storms, diseases, accidents, and conflicts. But those communications were not military reports. They were communities working together to help each other. Every crisis you detected was proof that humans refuse to abandon each other, no matter how difficult the situation becomes. The chamber was completely silent now. You fear us because we are different, because we solve problems in ways you have never seen before, because we adapt and change and refuse to accept limitations that other species consider absolute. Jiwon looked directly at the chief arbiter. But our differences are not a threat to galactic civilization. They are a gift. He paused, thinking of his parents, his friends, his home planet, that might be quarantined forever. Earth taught us that any challenge can be overcome. Any problem can be solved. Any seemingly impossible situation can be handled if you are willing to work hard enough and think creatively enough and never ever give up. He stood straighter. That is what we offer the galaxy, not conquest or destruction, but the knowledge that no problem is truly impossible. When Jiwon returned to his seat, the chamber remained quiet for a long moment. Then the chief arbiter spoke. The tribunal will now deliberate. We will reconvene in 4 hours with our decision. As the judges filed out, Jiwon looked back at his parents. His father gave him a small nod of approval. His mother was crying, but she was smiling too. Whatever the tribunal decided, he had told the truth about humanity. Now they would learn whether the galaxy was ready to accept humans as they were, or whether they would be forever isolated for the crime of being too good at solving problems. The next 4 hours would determine humanity's future among the stars. The tribunal's decision had satisfied no one. Earth would remain classified as Class Z, but human students already enrolled in galactic institutions could complete their education under strict supervision. No new human students would be admitted, but current students would not be deported. Limited cultural exchange would be permitted, but no expansion of trade or diplomatic relations. It was a compromise that left humanity in limbo, neither fully accepted nor completely rejected. 6 months later, Jiwon stood in the observation deck of the transport ship carrying him back to Earth. After 3 years among the stars, he was finally going home. But the home he was returning to was not the same one he had left. Da-hyun joined him at the viewing window. She had completed her linguistics degree and was returning to Earth as well, carrying with her the most comprehensive database of galactic languages ever assembled by a human. Are you nervous? She asked. Terrified, Jiwon admitted. Everything I learned out there, everything we discovered about how the galaxy really works. How do we explain that to people who have been told their world is too dangerous for civilized species to visit? Through the window, Earth grew larger. The blue and green sphere that aliens called a war zone still looked like paradise to Jiwon's eyes. We start small, Da-hyun said. We share what we learned with people who can understand it. Scientists, engineers, diplomats. We build a network here like we built one out there. The transport ship entered Earth's atmosphere with barely a tremor. Human engineering had always been focused on practical solutions rather than impressive displays. The landing pad in Seoul was modest compared to the crystal platforms of alien worlds, but it was efficient and reliable. Jiwon's parents were waiting for him, along with his younger sister Minji, who had grown taller in the 3 years he had been away. The reunion was emotional but brief. They were being watched by both Earth security forces and alien observers monitoring the limited cultural exchange. "You look different," his mother said as they drove through the streets of Seoul toward their family apartment. "I feel different," Jiwon replied, watching the city pass by the windows. To alien eyes, the bustling traffic would look like chaos. The construction projects would seem like constant warfare. The emergency sirens and news broadcasts would sound like a world in perpetual crisis. But Jiwon saw what he had always seen: a community of people working together to solve problems, adapt to challenges, and build something better for their children. Over the following weeks, Jiwon reconnected with the underground network they had built among human students. Wubin had returned to Earth and was working with a team of engineers to develop new space technologies based on what they had learned about galactic systems. Yuna was consulting with the United Nations about diplomatic strategies for eventual re-engagement with galactic civilization. But it was the broader changes on Earth that surprised Jiwon most. The Class Z designation had not broken human spirit. It had focused it. Knowing that they were considered too dangerous for galactic society had motivated Earth's governments to work together in ways they never had before. Climate change projects that had stalled for decades were now moving forward with unprecedented international cooperation. Military conflicts were being resolved through new diplomatic frameworks developed by people who understood how the galaxy viewed human warfare. Scientific research was accelerating as Earth's brightest minds worked to prove that human innovation was valuable rather than dangerous. "They tried to isolate us," Lim Ji-ho explained during a meeting of returned students. He had been studying interstellar economics and brought back insights about galactic trade systems. But isolation only made us stronger. Han Soo-young, who had specialized in alien psychology, nodded in agreement. "The galaxy thinks of us as unpredictable and dangerous. But we can use that. When they do decide to re-engage with us, we will have capabilities they never expected." The unofficial network of human students had become something larger during their time away. They had connections throughout galactic civilization now. Alien friends who had seen humans at their best, faculty members who questioned the classification system, even some government officials who believed the Hegemony Alliance had overreached. "Professor Veltar has been advocating for a review of the Earth classification," Da-hyun reported during one of their meetings. "He is not the only one. The evacuation footage changed a lot of minds. But the Hegemony Alliance is pushing back harder than ever," Wubin warned. "They are proposing new restrictions on all problematic species. Earth was just the beginning." Jiwon listened to his friends share intelligence from across the galaxy, but his attention kept drifting to the window of the conference room. Outside, Seoul continued its eternal dance of construction and growth. Traffic flowed through patterns that would seem chaotic to aliens, but made perfect sense to humans. Emergency vehicles responded to minor crises with efficiency that aliens would interpret as military precision. "What are you thinking about?" Yuna asked, noticing his distraction. "I was thinking about my great-grandfather," Jiwon said. "The one who led his village to safety during the war. My grandmother always said he did not wait for permission to do the right thing." "What does that have to do with our situation?" Jiwon turned back to the group. "We have been trying to prove to the galaxy that we are not dangerous. But maybe that is the wrong approach. Maybe we should prove that we are exactly as dangerous as they think. Dangerous to ignorance, dangerous to stagnation, dangerous to the idea that some problems cannot be solved." 6 months later, when the first unofficial diplomatic contact was established between Earth and the Altarian Republic, it was facilitated by Kang Min-soo and other alien students who had studied alongside humans. When new medical treatments developed on Earth began saving lives on worlds throughout the galaxy, they were distributed through networks built by former exchange students. When disasters struck on colony worlds and established evacuation procedures, Failed, it was human engineering teams who developed the solutions that saved lives. When the rigid diplomatic protocols of the Hegemony Alliance proved inadequate for handling emerging conflicts, it was human negotiators who found creative compromises. The galaxy was slowly learning what Ji-Wan had always known, that being dangerous and being valuable were not mutually exclusive. Standing on the roof of his apartment building one evening, watching the sunset paint Seoul's skyline in shades of gold and red, Ji-Wan received a message on his communication device. It was from Professor Veltar, transmitted through the limited cultural exchange channels. Mr. Park, the message read, I wanted you to know that 3 more worlds have petitioned for human exchange students to be allowed in their educational systems. The tribunal is reviewing these requests. It seems that your demonstration of human danger has made some species eager to experience it for themselves. Ji-Wan smiled, remembering his first day at the Galactic Academic Consortium, when Earth was just a Class-C developing world, and humans were seen as promising newcomers to galactic civilization. Now Earth was a Class-Z war zone, but humans were increasingly seen as essential partners for anyone facing impossible problems. The galaxy had marked Earth as too dangerous for civilized contact. But they were beginning to understand that sometimes, the most dangerous thing you could do was refuse to change. As the stars appeared in the darkening sky, Ji-Wan thought about his friends scattered across the galaxy, building bridges between human and alien civilizations one relationship at a time. The official classification might never change, but the reality was already transforming. Earth would always be the world that taught its people that no problem was impossible to solve. And now the galaxy was learning that lesson too, one crisis at a time. For humans, the Class Z designation was not a barrier to overcome. It was simply another problem to solve. And if there was one thing the universe could count on, it was that humans never gave up when faced with the impossible. The end. Homecoming was complete, but the real journey was just beginning.